So I'm going to get started here, and I'm sure other people will jump on. Now we're starting to see a bunch of people come in. Good, good. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us for this is the first of two Google Hangouts that we're going to be doing for the upcoming project grants deadline. My name is Scott Winship. I'm the Director of Grant Making Programs. I'm joined by my colleagues Emily Bookwalter and Sam Rising. Rising. Thanks. Why can I not say your last name? Like I said, this is the first of two Google Hangouts that we're going to be doing. This one will be primarily we'll be looking at the project form itself, going over some of the most frequently asked questions, as well as fielding some questions that may not be as frequent, that might be specific to something that you're working on. Our second Hangout next week, we'll be dissecting a couple of projects, ones that were awarded and ones that weren't, going over and highlighting some of the common errors that occur and how best to address those in advance. So be sure to join that one as well. It'll be different than this one, so that's something to keep in mind. This is the first time we've done a Google Hangout for the community, so please bear with us if we have any technical issues. We're working through this at the same time. For those of you who have received an invitation, you can type in questions, and we'll do our best to address those as they come in. For those of you just watching, you can also email questions to info@newmusicusa.org, and we'll be screening those throughout as well to try to address those. Really quickly, how this session is going to work. Basically, I'm going to start by going over a few key elements of the guidelines and the review criteria before we jump in to the forms themselves and sort of look through each of the three tabs of the actual project grant form. And we'll be going, as we go through that, we'll be going over tips and addressing questions as they arise that way. And like I said, we'll be taking questions as we go. So with that, I'm going to jump in really quick and go over a little bit about some of the basic stuff about the guidelines and the review criteria in particular, which will inform some of the other things that we'll be talking about in a little bit here. So the projects or what we support. As you have probably read the guidelines now, we can support a huge range of activity through the flexibility of this format and the project grants format itself. Projects, in our case, involve new music that is disseminated publicly in some way, and that should be either a performance or a recording. So that means you have to have a performance lined up for the work, or a recording, or some sort of public aspect to the work. You can apply for a range of things, and this is a frequent question that we get: is can I apply for this? Can I apply for that? A range of things such as commissioning fees, musician fees, travel, copying costs, artist fees, rehearsal fees, outreach activities, recording fees. Those types of things that you might have as a project involves are things that you can apply for. We are primarily interested, keep this in mind, we are primarily interested in having our funds go directly to paying artists for their work. And so that means that we're less likely to award production costs, for instance, or room rentals or studio rentals, things like that. We're very much interested in having the funds that we award go to artists for doing their work, whether that be composing, performing, etc. That said, travel costs are same thing, would be going to artists directly for what they're doing. It's the production kind of costs that are things that we won't likely fund. We do have a few areas of special emphasis. You can apply for a range of different things, but we do have about 4 areas that we are particularly interested in funding and have some dedicated funding for. The first of that is the creation of new work or commissioning fees, new live music for dance, recording fees, and residency and community outreach activities. Just so you're aware, in the first year, the largest funding area that we had and the largest amount of money that we gave away was for the creation of new work. So commissioning fees. That's an area that we have a fair amount of money for, and that's something we're always going to be funding. Also keep in mind that the largest request area that we had during the first year was for recording fees. Now this is an area that we had the most application requests for, is recording fees. It's a huge It's a huge issue in the field. Huge need in the field right now. So you should keep that in mind, because that is one of the most competitive areas that we have in the project grants is for recording fees. So there's just a ton of applications that come in for that.
I wish we had $1 billion for recording fees. I really do, you
know. Applications can come from individuals or organizations. You don't need to have a 501c3. You don't need to be a nonprofit. You don't need to have a fiscal sponsorship. Individuals and organizations can apply. Request amounts that are listed in the guidelines. This year we are placing a lot more emphasis on smaller requests of $3,000 and less. We're setting aside specifically $100,000 of this round just for this area of requests 3,000 and below, which means that there is a slightly higher chance of getting an award in this area. If you have a project that is smaller, you might want to consider a $3,000 or below request. There is a little bit higher percentage chance there. And also keep in mind that we do provide partial funding. It's not an all or nothing grant. If awarded, we do provide partial funding. We try to make those meaningful grants as well. That's just an overview of some of the guideline things I wanted to touch on. And before we jump into the forum, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the criteria, the review criteria. This is also a huge area of questions and maybe some confusion about what is the panel actually reviewing when they're looking at your projects. There's basically three very general criteria: artistry, impact, and capacity. Artistry is the most important element. They're very much listed in order of importance. Artistry is by far the most important one, followed by impact, and lastly by capacity. The projects will go through a stage 1 review that is solely reviewed on the artistic promise as demonstrated by examples of past or present work, your media samples on the project itself. If the project makes it through this stage, it moves on to a full review, separate panel reviews, again for artistry, and then impact and capacity. So when I say artistry, what is that? What does that even mean? I mean, artistry by its nature is a matter of interpretation, and there are a lot of different ways to think about artistry. We give our panelists a series of sort of questions to help frame their thinking when they're reviewing your project. I'm going to share those with you, which might be helpful when you're thinking about what types of work samples you want to submit or media samples you want to submit. In terms of artistry, we ask, is the work compelling? Does it compel your interest? Does it make you want to keep listening or watching? Does it embody a distinctive or authentic artistic voice, or is it derivative? Does the work feel fresh? Does it show highly developed craft or technical excellence? Those are just some basic questions when thinking about artistry that the panel are charged with. Also, they're encouraged to review or look at the collaborator profiles. If they're, I know we only give you space for 3 media samples on the public page. If you have a lot of collaborators that are key to your project, ask them to put some samples in their profiles, and because the panelists are instructed, if there's a work from a collaborator that they want to see that may not be demonstrated in those 3 main media samples on the project, they're asked to look into the profile. So there's an opportunity. You can have 3 media samples in each profile, so there's another huge opportunity to provide more work samples for folks to look at. The second review criteria we have is impact. The panelists are asked to take the project as a whole. What is the impact on the participating artists and or the community and audiences involved? So is the project a particularly meaningful opportunity for the composer or the community or the musicians involved? Does it represent an opportunity to build new relationships? Or if it's a relationship that's already been formed, is that relationship moving in a new direction, or perhaps exploring new work that is unique in some way, or build on those existing relationships? And lastly, the third criteria is capacity. The panelists do not rank this. They don't provide a score. It's just 2 simple questions. Basically, can they do it, which is a yes, no, or maybe. Does the panel or does this particular panelist feel that you can do the project? And is the request amount appropriate. So they want to make sure that you're requesting something that makes sense for the project that you have, and that you're not over requesting, or it makes sense with what your project is.
Yeah. And to be clear on that last point in particular, people are not penalized for asking for what they need, or so if a panelist does feel that the ask is higher than they would have thought, that's not something that penalizes the project or makes it any less likely to be funded. Those are discussions that we take into consideration after something has landed already in the pool of award consideration. So it just helps inform us when we are trying to make our funds stretch as far as possible each round.
And just to answer one of the top questions here about the time frame of the project, you said that yes, we are in fact referring to retroactive expenses. You can apply for activity that takes place up to 6 months prior to this deadline. So retroactive expenses are fine. In that case, your project should demonstrate what actually happened. Tell us what happened. Media samples should be directly related to that. They won't be past work samples. They'll be work samples of that exact project. So that is eligible. You can do that. That should be fine.
Yeah, and so just to add on to that a little bit, there's someone else who's asked a question. Could you talk a little bit about the best way to apply for grants or projects that have already taken place? Exactly as Scott just said, that's where you're going to want to really show what has already happened. Preferably have some media samples that demonstrate the work that has taken place. It's possible, if it's a recording, you're still waiting on some things. You're still, you have rough mixes, et cetera, et cetera. So, that's one thing that we would definitely be looking for. But you can have kind of rough stuff to submit. I know we're very flexible in that regard. It doesn't have to be high polished, amazing media, and that actually goes for the entirety of the project grants. They don't have to be highly produced. You spent $3,000 on. It can be you shot it with your iPhone. You happen to have a great microphone, with relatively distinguishable sounds, and that's fine. A lot of this is really DIY. It just looks flashy because it's on our very shiny, pretty site, but a lot of it is we'll just doing stuff. And some of it is very high produced, but there's a range, and we're totally down with all of that. I mean, we're artists too, so we do a lot of DIY stuff all the time. So I hope that answers the questions about retroactive.
Yeah, we're going to jump into the project form. There's a few other questions I think as we go through this that will get answered, or we can address as we get to them. So Emily, why don't you jump in here?
Sure. First, I'm just going to try and share my screen with all of us to make sure that it works. This is where the moment of truth. Oh, Google. So, I want to walk us through the form because I think it's going to answer some of the questions that I see on here. For example, someone says here, I'm confused about the application because it looks like there's no actual form to fill in, only guidelines. So that's not actually true. After you log into newmusicusa.org, you have to register first for the website, but once you do that, you'll be brought to your dashboard, and there's a big blue button that says Start a Project, and that'll take you to the guidelines, and at the bottom of the guidelines, there's another big blue button that says Start a Project, and the point of that is just because we want to encourage people to read the guidelines. So, so there's that, but I'm going to, can you remind me where the presenter is?
At the top.
This one? Awesome. Screen share.
Forward.
All right.
Oh, well, that's
so
the back
end. Oh, well. Right. So I hope that this is now visible to everyone. I'm sharing the screen. And basically, I'm logged in. I've logged into newmusicusa.org, and I'm on the home page right now. So I'm going to want to go to Dashboard, okay? And here's that big blue button I was talking about, Start a Project. These are the projects that I'm currently following. If you're not following any projects, you won't see some of our awarded projects. These are just some of my favorite projects that we've awarded, so I follow them to get updates about them. So I'm going to click on Start a Project. Takes me to the Guidelines page. I read all the guidelines, hooray, and then I start new project.
Then we just a little bit so I can see some questions.
Of course. So this is the beginning of the form for a project page. And so step one is the public information. And this is where I would enter my project title. So, this will just be Emily's viola recording project. Awesome. I'm going to select what kind of project this is, type of project. Now, we completely understand that these are limited things that you can select from here. And here we even say that. We know it's hard to classify art. We understand that art is diverse. These general categories help us find panelists that can help give your project the insightful expertise it deserves. And also, if you haven't utilized any of these little help text things, these little question marks here, I would highly recommend doing so. There is a good amount of information. But to go back to type of project, this is actually quite important because we do match your project with like-minded panelists who have that expertise. So let's say you have a dance project. You're going to write a new piece to be performed with an excellent dance company or choreographer somewhere. You would select dance so that the choreographer and people who write for dance frequently, and there are many composers on our panel that do, would be the people reviewing your project, and not somebody who's never worked with dancers in their life, and that wouldn't make sense. So, and the same goes for each category: electronics, interdisciplinary, jazz, large ensemble, recording, small ensemble, or solo, or theater, which encompasses opera as well. So that's type of project.
Well, let me back up.
Sure.
I want to go over just a little bit on type of project. You can select one or all of these categories,
Indeed.
but you have to be careful about what you select here, and you want to think a little bit about what best represents your project. In the first year, we had a number of projects that selected maybe up to 5 of these different categories. And you want to think about how best that represents your project and also how that helps or hurts us when it comes to matching it with a panel that has expertise in those areas. For instance, we had one project in the first year that tagged a bunch, like I said, a bunch of these projects: jazz, dance, small ensemble, etc. Their project may have included some dance, but it wasn't as apparent, and they didn't choose any media samples that demonstrated either dance or choreography. However, since it selected dance, it was reviewed by a choreographer who was a little confused, as there was no actual dance element there. So I encourage you to think carefully about how best to represent your project, and think about the implications of that and how it sort of overall ties in with your media samples and the project as a whole. Just something to consider.
Yeah, it definitely has a direct correlation with the success of your project in review. So, moving on, performance or recording dates. A lot of people choose a very big range of dates for this field, and that's not what we want. What is really helpful for us and for a panelist who's trying to get an idea of when the project is taking place is a very specific period of time in which the performance or the recording is going to be released or will be taking place. Now, if you do have a recording that is taking like 8 months to get, happen, fine. But make sure that if you do have that kind of broad period of time, that it's specified, details of that recording and dates in which certain sessions will take place are specified in the public narrative or the private narrative. And I'm going to talk more about the public and private narrative in a second, because I see we have a question here about the difference between that. So asterisk on that. Next is a tagline. This is just a really short sentence about your project page. So I would say, like, 3 excellent string players get together to create experimental sounds or something. And some people write other things, and you can basically write whatever you want. That could be an excerpt from something that inspired your piece. It can be a general overview. It can be something witty. It's totally what you want to use to kind of give an elevator snapshot glimpse into your project.
But it shouldn't really be hashtags
Not
or
meta tags.
tags
Different.
like Twitter,
Yeah.
Tumblr style.
Different.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. That's a great distinction. So we're on to the public description. So this is where we really want people writing this project form who are often artists. They're not necessarily professional grant writers. There are people who do that for a living also doing this, and that's fine. But we really want this to be an accessible, low-stakes situation. So this is where you'll talk about you and your art and your project and the people that you're working with. This is where you would talk about any, any motivation, artistic motivation for the piece. It's where you might want to expand on a cool story about how you and your collaborators met. It's where you might want to talk about specifics for your dates or specifics for your venues, things like that. And someone asked a question on here, what do I do if in the project page I'm going to work with one venue and then they back out? Can we work with another venue? In general, we're very flexible about certain things.
Yeah, this something to keep in mind is
Yeah.
this is not necessarily contractual. I mean, we want to get a sense of what the project is, and dates can change, venues can change, things like that. But you should be sure to give us any context to the work, and also you want the panel to feel confident that that this project is going to take place, and that you have things set and ready to go. Even if you don't have specific dates yet, you may have an idea it's happening spring 2016 or whatever, something like that. It's your opportunity to kind of talk a little bit more about that, and that's fine in this case. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In general, what I've said for many years now in a row is more informed a panel is, the more likely they are to make an award. So the more educated you can make your panelists feel about, even if you think it's just the most mundane detail of your project, it's generally going to serve you well. So I highly recommend providing as many specifics as possible because it always serves you well. Project location, where's your project going to take place? A lot of projects take place in many locations. So choose one that's your favorite and talk about the rest of them in the public narrative. Your role, so you might be a composer. Yeah, please.
Go ahead. I was just going to mention that we get a lot of questions about if projects can take place outside of the United States, which is totally eligible. It's just it's for US-based artist organizations going to perform overseas. Like we've awarded projects that have taken place in China and in Austria, but they're US-based ensembles going over there and performing. Yeah, if you're a composer and you have a recording session that's the Czech National Philharmonic is doing, and you want to apply for grants here to pay that organization, that's not eligible through this. However, your travel and costs going over for those sessions would be eligible here. So we want our funds, and actually our funds can only go towards US-based artists in this situation.
Indeed. So that is, I'm just looking at some of our questions to make sure that I answer them as we go. So that is a great point. Here is the part that often will trip some people up. Collaborators. You can add up to 6 collaborators. Basically, this is an opportunity for you to tag somebody on your project, and it completely takes the place of a letter of agreement. All told, this process should take about 30 seconds to 1 minute. If there are any difficulties, we are well versed in helping people out, and we're happy to do it. So this is where you will tag a key player in your project by first clicking Add Collaborator. So first we're going to search to see if they are in the system. I'm going to invite my colleague, Sam. There's Sam right there. And he has a few because we've tested a number of times. But I'm going to invite Sam Rising. The rising sun. So now what's happened is I've invited him, okay? Let's say I'm going to invite somebody else who doesn't exist. And it's going to be like...
Or that's my role.
That's your role. Sorry, he's going to be a composer. Thank you. So let's say I'm going to add somebody who doesn't exist, okay? And it's going to be like some letters. No matches found. So that is when and that's not a real name. I just typed some things in. That's when, let's say I search for somebody, I've tried a couple spellings, I can't find them, I'm going to invite a new user.
One point of note is that if you do search for somebody, that list can get quite long if their name is a very common name. At the bottom of that list, if you don't see them, at the very bottom is where you're going to find that link that says invite new user. Don't miss that. It's way at the bottom of the list. Okay.
Right. So that's when I'll write their first name, their last name. I'll type in their email address, confirm their email address, click add to project. They will be added to my project. Keep in mind that in order for me to officially invite Sam, I have to save my project. So I'm going to save my project. Saved. It took me to step 2, but I'm going to go back to step 1. Okay? So.
And I just got an email.
Just now.
Yeah, that will link me to confirm my collaboration on the project.
Heard your phone buzz.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yes. So Sam gets an email. It says, you've been tagged on Emily Buchholzer's Viola project. Please click here to confirm. And he already had a profile, therefore he won't get login instructions with a password because he already has it, he already has a profile. If you forget your password and username combination, you can log in, or rather you can go and click on forgot username, forgot password, and do the whole thing. Or you can email us. You know, that's another way to do it. We help people all the time. Again, happy to do it. It's our job. So there's that. Let's go to select a file to upload for your header image. And that is the part of the project that is just a big banner image at the top. This does not have to be a professionally created graphic. This does not have to be anything that takes you time, money, experience to make. It can be just like a photo that you have of a performance. If you don't have any photos of performances, we've linked here in the help text to Flickr Creative Commons. I steal photos from this all the time, every day, all the time, for blog posts here, for some stuff I do with an orchestra outside of this job. You know, it's just wonderful, and it's just free photos that you can use for any purpose. And a lot of them are beautiful and better than anything I would ever take or make myself. So that's a great resource, and I highly encourage people who are like, well, God, I don't know what photo to use, to take advantage of that. So header image, we have the aspect ratios here. If you have trouble with figuring out what size it's supposed to be, or if it's over 1 megabyte, we have another resource here in the help text to pick resize, which I also use all the time. It's a free online software, and you can just go and upload your photo that's, let's say it's 5 megabytes, way too big, and you can specify the size you want it to be. You want it to be under 1 megabyte, and it'll just resize it for you. You download it and then upload it to here, and it's very easy. I love that software. I highly recommend using it. Let's move on. Step 2. This is the private information, and this is going to be a good opportunity to address a few of the questions that we have here. The first one we have here is a project considerably more compelling if it already has additional sources of resources and support in place? And Neil Shaw-Cohen asked us this question. So, no, not necessarily. Some people do choose here in this private information to, after they've entered in their request amount, say in their private description if they have already secured funding. And that's fine. That's completely fine if you would like to. It does certainly inform the third criteria, capacity. But as we already said, that criteria does not come into conversation until they've already scored well for artistry twice, because that's the most important, and then the positive impact the project would have on those involved. And then we talk about things like capacity. So for some people, this is their first grant. This is the first funding they've had for a huge project, and that's also fine. We're not like a foundation or a government institution. We're just a nonprofit.
I'm going to jump in a little too. And if your project, if for instance this is a new project and you don't have a lot of secured funding, again, what Emily said is correct. But I would be sure to you know, at least in the narrative or maybe in the private description, talk about ways that you, basically what you want to do is make the panel feel good that the project's going to happen. So there are different ways of doing that. You can talk about, prospective funding that you're exploring. You can talk about, the venues confirmed, things like that. Anything that you can do to make the panel feel comfortable that the project is actually going to happen if we provide funding for it. So you don't have to have a lot of stuff secure necessarily, but you do want to make them feel comfortable and feel good about the project as it's actually going to happen.
Right, totally. Maybe this is another opportunity to address another question in here I saw, talking about the difference between the Greg Sinibaldi asked this question, can you explain the differences between the public and private descriptions? What info is best to put in each? That's a great question. So as we already somewhat touched on, the public description is where you want to talk about things you would want anybody who was just interacting with your project to find out. So that's where you put, kind of talking about how you met, the artistic motivation behind the project, et cetera, et cetera. The private description is where you want to put information like tentative plans you might want to share with the panel. It's where you might want to talk about your revenue that you have for the project so far, because we only asked for you to provide expenses. It's also where you might want to talk about, how you're still solidifying a couple plans with a venue, which is fine. Again, like, we completely understand some of this stuff is planned way out, and you don't have all the details finalized, and you can quite frankly say so in the private description, and that's fine. So that's kind of the primary difference, and the help text, I hope, in both of those helps make it clear. So there's that.
Sorry, Emily.
No problem.
We're just MacGyvering your screen here.
MacGyvering some stuff. So okay. Now we've talked about the private description. I wanted to make sure those questions were answered.
Yeah.
Amount requested. So this round in particular, as my dear colleague Scott said, grants requests of $3,000 and below are being highly recognized. We are very committed to small grants and a lot of the intense need that artists requesting these modest funds have, not only for the money, but for the public exposure that this platform can provide, and just in general, they're often very meaningful. And that really matters to us because, I mean, we're kind of small beans artists too. Like, it's a big deal. So that is a great part of this round. So let's say I'm requesting $3,000. So I hit enter.
I'll probably just click outside of it.
Oh, I have to click outside of it. So I requested $3,000. This is where, in project expenses, you're going to list your entire project's expenses. And I see we have a question here. If my total project budget is $10,000 and I'm asking for $5,000, do I need to show the panel the expenses and funding for the other $5,000? Yes. This is where we'd like you to list, please, your entire project's expenses. So I'm requesting $3,000, but let's say I have copying costs that are $5,000. Let's say I have recording fees that are $2,000, and I'm commissioning a composer for $10,000. And I say, I am just requesting $3,000 for partial commissioning fees. And then I might say where I got the rest of that money, or where I intend to raise the rest of that money. But the private description, in addition to talking about any revenue or tentative plans you might have, it's also where you can clarify some of your expenses, and talk about where you want that money to go, where you need that money to go. So that is how you would preferably list your expenses. And let's move on. I think there was another question in here.
1,500 below one.
Oh, a 1,500 below one. There was a 1,500 below one. Okay. For grants over $1,500, the instructions say to list expenses. So it's kind of what I just did. But in terms of detail, not super detailed. Like, we don't need 25 line items of every single little thing. Like, we trust you. If you want to put it in big categories of just like producer fees or commissioning fees, musician fees, you know, you can put it in these big bulk categories, and we trust you. You know, I mean, it's expensive to do art. I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, if you can break it down, sometimes that's helpful. For us on the back end, it doesn't necessarily have as much of
in crazy detail.
as much implication on the panel necessarily as it does on the award allocation if awarded, and we can come back for further information. But you know, itemize as best you can, but you don't have to get too crazy.
Don't get crazy. So that is the private description, and the private, this whole tab basically, private information. So I'm going to save. Make sure you save your work. You can come back to this and work on it at any point. You don't have to do it all in one shot. You can save it in sections, leave, go get an ice cream, come back, and access it. And I'll show you where you can find it if you've saved it and you've left and you come back at the end of this. A couple people were afraid that it had disappeared, and it had not. Media. So I believe Francis White just emailed us with a question about media to info. So I want to make sure that we have one about mixing and mastering, and we have one about work samples. So let's talk about the specifics of work samples in a second, and let's talk about just this media really quickly. So you can upload an MP3 or a PDF, let's say, as long as your MP3 is under 12 megabytes, and you can upload a PDF, let's say, of a score. PDFs not to upload, for example, are like posters, promotional things, basically anything that doesn't show the artistic merit of what you're doing. So a score is basically the only reason you would upload a PDF.
Or I mean, there are, if you're working with visual artists, things like that.
Or lyricist, right?
There are other options.
Right, there are.
But it should demonstrate artistic or artistry in some way. Promotional material, or this is not the right place for that.
Right. Thank you.
Or letters of support. This is not the right place for that either.
Right. Thank you for that. So the other 3 online things that we support are YouTube, Vimeo, and SoundCloud. Things to make sure, and we do have a number of help texts here, which I would highly encourage you to look at if you feel like you get stuck right here, because this can be tricky for some if you're not totally used to using YouTube, Vimeo, or SoundCloud. They're pretty commonly used, but in case you aren't sure how to use them, we have some help text here. So you want to make sure all your embed permissions are turned on, that your sample isn't set to private on YouTube, Vimeo, or SoundCloud. Otherwise, it's not going to work here. That being said, let's say I put a YouTube link here, and I write in my title, and I put a description in talking about the work, and I say, Emily, this is performed by Emily Bookwalter, written by Chris Cerrone, and performed at St. Anne and the Holy Trinity Church on November 3rd, 2013. You know, I write that in. I say, I worked on this of my collaborators because I tagged Sam. He's in it. He didn't work on this. I'm going to upload a different sample that shows Sam's expertise as a composer. He's the composer in this, and a lovely one at that. So that's what's going to happen. But let's say, you know what, I don't really want this to be public if this gets awarded. This is something that was experimental. It wasn't really meant to be advertised in a major way. So I'm going to click private. Do not show this sample to the public. Because we completely respect, especially with orchestral stuff or collective bargaining arrangements, or just artistically, you may not want to share something with the whole world. So that's where you'll say, I will not show this sample to the public. So let's talk about the quality of work samples.
Can I add just one more
thing
about public and private? If you have a private YouTube video or private Vimeo video, please supply a password in the description of the work. It's fine to have password protected work samples, that's fine, but please be sure to include the password in the description of the work, otherwise no one's going to be able to see it and it won't get reviewed.
Yeah. And just going off of that, on SoundCloud you can also share private links, but you have to share
the secret link, not the link to the track, but it's actually called the secret link.
It's not the URL that's at the top of your browser bar, but rather it's something that you click on within the SoundCloud player. You say share secret link, and that's what you copy and paste. That's tripped a couple people up, and we're always happy to help. And you can always preview your project too. This is worth saying right now. You can preview your project here and see how it looks so far to the public. Private samples won't show up here because that's how it'll look to the public. So I haven't written an overview or anything like that. Sam hasn't confirmed, so he's not filled in. But in the preview, you'll be able to see if you've embedded any media that doesn't play correctly, because you'll get a player that says, I'm sorry, we're unable to play this media. And that's when you know, okay, something is wrong with my work sample. I need to figure out what that is. Or you contact us and you let us know, and we can look into it and help you out with that, which we are super happy to do. So use preview because it's super helpful. Let's talk about work samples. So
yeah, quick. Let's do that quick, and then let's try questions if we can.
Yeah,
so.
Some of these are, well, these are questions. So Francis White asked, basically talking about submitting long works versus cutting them up and excerpting them. Excerpting is something we highly recommend choosing a cue point no matter what. Excerpting is something that is totally up to each artist. It depends on how much control you'd like to have over your panelists or the public if awarded viewing experience. That being said, if you already have a work sample up on YouTube or Vimeo or SoundCloud and you don't want to go in and edit it and do all this stuff, like, don't worry about it. Just take the link, put it in here, and give a cue point where you want to start in the public description. You know what I mean? Don't spend, the whole point is you're supposed to be doing art, you know, don't spend a ton of time editing all this stuff when it's completely acceptable to just provide a cue point. So you can also provide, she's asking here, if you have a long piece, say 25 minutes, that you are looking for funding for and you have a recording of it, can you submit 3 work samples? Is it best to submit the entire piece broken down into 3 parts, or submit 3 catchy excerpts from the piece, or submit 1 catchy excerpt from the piece and 2 excerpts from other pieces that are in the same genre? That's actually a question we've had multiple times for people that have done very long form works. It's completely up to you again. It really depends on how you want to control the panelists' listening experience. So if you really want them to hear certain parts of that piece, you can excerpt 3 different parts of them and have them exist as independent work samples within the project page, or you can provide the whole thing and just say, please listen in these 3 spots, and then provide 2 additional work samples if you really want to jam-pack as many diverse samples as possible. I tend to advise people to give as many positive and really high-quality work samples as possible. But again, it's completely up to you. I can't say that there's ever one scenario that's better than the other. It just depends on how good the sample is.
And in relation to your project, it depends on the project itself. I mean, if it's a recording for long form work, then you may just want to demonstrate that single work. It really depends on the project and the situation, but put your best foot forward as much as you can. Let's take a few of these questions here. I'm just going to start.
Oh, I was just going to say, do you want to show them where they can find a project, and then maybe we can stop sharing the screen and get our faces back up there?
Let's do one more thing.
Sure.
So, let's say I have left I'm going to go to the home page. Like, I've just come to this website. I saved my project, and I went and got an ice cream, and then I came back. And I go to newmusicusa.org, and this is what it looks like. I'm like, okay, you guys won't have this stuff because I'm an administrator, but you will see dashboard here. Click on dashboard, and I'm under my projects. I'm going to scroll down to the current round. Current round, fall 2014. here's a project I was testing. Here's the one that we just did together. Emily's viola recording project. I click on it. And I'm taken back to my project, and I can keep working. So that's where you find it. It's on your dashboard. You just scroll down and click the one that you've been working on.
Perfect. Thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
All right, let's hit some of these questions here. The top one here: would it make sense to have both the sponsoring organization and the composer apply for funding separately for different aspects of the project? You certainly can do that. That's one way of approaching it. That's really up to you in terms of how you want to do it. What?
Sure. Some technical things.
It's not. Please continue.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you can certainly do that. You can also, that's one way of doing it. Also be aware that you can apply for the same project multiple times over up to 3 times, basically. So if you apply for one aspect of it during this round and get awarded, you can apply for a different aspect of the same project in the next round. That's also another way of doing it.
Here, this is for you.
Gotcha. All right. Wait, what? I'm sorry.
They don't. It doesn't scroll, so you're gonna have to use.
I don't know how to do that. So,
here.
Is it acceptable to link to other short audio samples or websites with short video samples, audio samples in the public description, and save the 3 allocated media slots for more substantial, informative media? That's also something you can do. That's up to you. You can put links and hyperlinks into the public narrative.
Yeah,
that's certainly
and
a way
we
of doing
recommend it. It's nice.
And there's you could also, like I said, use the collaborator profiles or your individual profile as a way to place other work samples that might be relevant to the project.
Next, with regard to the up to $3,000 funding category, I'm trying to understand if a project has a better chance of getting funded if I limited my request to $3,000 or under. Mr. Winship.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Sure. Is it more competitive to request $3,000 projects? Does it have a better chance of getting funded if you request $3,000?
It's a good question. This is the first time we're doing this, so we're not sure what the response is going to be. We are allocating a large amount of money just for small projects, so we will increase the number of awards to projects that get awarded or request $3,000 and below. So the likelihood is that your percentage and chance increases by requesting a smaller amount, although it depends on the project and also depends on how many people apply for 3,000 and below. I would say anecdotally at the moment, it probably, based on first year numbers, it would be a little bit, you'd have a little bit better of a percentage chance of getting award if you request a small amount. And it's really up to you. I mean, I don't want you to. Everyone shouldn't necessarily request small amounts. We have money, we will give away money that are larger requests, but we do value small projects and small requests. And these are important awards to make, and so we're making a concerted effort to address that.
Indeed. So, next question. Okay. What if your project is we've answered that one. Is there more interest in commissions for new works or for performances of new works that may have already had their premiere? I always hear that it is easier to get a first performance than a second, third, and fourth one. Patricia Gray asked that. Patricia, I totally agree with you, and we are most certainly an organization that supports the repeat performances of a work that's already been premiered, because that's super valuable and it's very important to not just have a commission that then never sees the light of day ever again. So there is a tremendous interest in commissioning new works. That is a priority for us. We do have specific funds for the creation of new work. However, we also have funds for the performance of pre-existing works because that's equally important.
Yeah, the panel is not really looking one way or the other for either whether it's a new work or a pre-existing work. Their primary charge is to rate artistry and artistic merit. So they're really looking at that primarily. Is this a good piece of music? Is it performed well? Is it a good piece? Is this something we want to support artistically? So I wouldn't get caught up in the distinction between the two. We do have certain amounts of money to give away for the creation of new work, but you got to get past the panel process to even get to that point. So I would encourage you to consider making sure that your work samples are the strongest, and go from there. So it looks like.
Next question. How much of the work samples will the panel listen to?
That's a good question. I saw that down here. It's really up to each individual panelist in terms of whether or not they feel they can evaluate the work. Often panelists, what we find is, will listen to a fair amount, more than we expect. They'll listen to a fair amount, especially if they find it interesting and compelling. So it's variable, but you should be aware that the time that the panel has to review isn't as much as anybody wants. I mean, they're reviewing a large number of applications. The way the panel process is that each panelist is working individually, and they can allot their own time for it. So often they'll work in smaller chunks, which actually is more beneficial for the applicants themselves than rather sitting in a room going through a series of applications and only getting 5 minutes per application. So this way they can rest their ears and come back to a work. But it's variable. A lot of panelists will listen to, they'll spend at least maybe 10 to 15 minutes on a project reviewing the artistic aspects of it. That may not seem like a lot. It depends on the media samples. It might be more, it might be less. It really just depends. So there's no certain amount of time, and it's variable for each panelist.
If you are an artist, would you also be able to apply for fees for yourself? What about retroactive fees for you and collaborators in a concert that already took place? If you are an artist, definitely apply for fees for yourself. You absolutely deserve to be compensated for your time as an artist. That is why we exist. Please ask for funds for yourself. Yes, you may also apply for retroactive funds. I think we've talked about that for yourself and your collaborators. But I can't emphasize enough that your time spent creating art is valuable, and it deserves to have money.
You can apply for yourself.
You should apply for yourself. Okay. This is about revenue. We've already asked. Annie Gosfield just asked a question. If a performer is requesting commissioning funds for more than one composer for works that would premiere on the same concert, do you recommend a separate application for each composer, or combining them into one proposal? Put them in one proposal.
Yeah, if it's on a single concert, I would put it. I mean, it depends also on your request amount. We've seen projects that have multiple commissions that may go beyond that $20,000 top end limit, and then you may want to put them on separate applications so you can request more. But you're probably better off in this case putting them into one project. It's going to have a better chance through the panel process, probably.
Yeah, and it's just less work for you. Yeah, if money is the primary motivating reason to do two, then go nuts. But if you'd rather present the project as this unified front that has multiple composers involved, it's kind of this really exciting event that has a lot of different compositional aspects to it. Definitely do one, and also save yourself a couple hours of work, if not more. So that's I think we have. There might be one more here. Oh, from Joe Bertolozzi. A request for funds in mixing and mastering an already finished set of audio files for a committed album release likely to be considered? Yes. As you know, many art music labels now act as a distributor of a finished album rather than provide full-service studio services from inception to release.
We do know that.
Totally. We do know that. A lot of artists have chosen to forego music labels altogether for that very reason and just self-release their album and do it on their own terms. Other people don't. But mixing and mastering, totally fine. Paying your musicians for their time spent recording, totally fine. Venue rental, studio rental, engineering, distribution, publicity for the album, whatever. I mean, all the things that are crucial to making an album, totally kosher. Go for it.
Yeah, those are all eligible. We'll probably, just so you know, that we'll probably put more emphasis on awarding the actual work that takes place. So that's mixing fees or recording fees or musicians' time, things like that. Those are going to be higher on the list of things that will get funded. Just be aware of that. Where people are involved in particular, where artists are involved in particular, is something that we're most interested in. Any other questions we have out there?
I'm just looking through to see. I think we might have answered all of them.
And there's no more on this thing because we can't.
Well, I'm looking.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great.
All right.
Well, we're about out of time anyway.
Yeah.
If there aren't any other questions.
There's one more here from Nina Peterson Perlman. I'm sorry, Nina, that I missed this. What is the definition of small ensembles versus large? Use your best judgment, but generally a large ensemble, we'd say it's maybe, you can argue that a 10-person ensemble is a large ensemble. A chamber group, probably a small ensemble, chamber being 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7 to 8 players. You start to get up 9, 10 and bigger, you can say that's for large ensemble. I mean, really, when we think large, we're thinking like choir, orchestra, band, opera. Yeah, that's a huge undertaking. So use your best judgment, but it's those two categories. I know we've talked about panelist assignment and how those are important for the review. Those two categories are often, most of our panelists have experience in both because the line is sort of hard to draw and our panelists are very experienced. So I wouldn't fret too much about that one. It's more of the genre and other means of...
Specific expertise in particular is something to take into consideration. If you're clicking dance, it's likely going to get reviewed by... Likely going to be reviewed by a choreographer, so keep that in mind. If you're clicking jazz, it's going to be reviewed by somebody who has expertise in jazz and improvised music. If you're clicking theater and opera, it's going to be reviewed by somebody who has expertise in writing opera or being a librettist or producing large work for theater. Those are the areas that you really should be aware of. Large ensemble, small ensemble, we do the same thing. The folks who get those are versed in large ensemble work, but often folks who are versed in large ensemble work are also very versed in small ensembles. So it gets a little bit blurrier when you get lower down the line, but it's what you want to think about is specific expertise that might have an impact on the review. So particularly dance, jazz, opera, theater, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Allie Cook, is it more desirable to create an entire album, or is it equally considered when recording just one work? Just one work is cool. It doesn't have to be a whole album. Some people, especially those working on a self-released album, do a lot of stuff piecemeal. Where like March is going to be one track, and next year is going to be another track. People do stuff on their own time, and that's completely fine. Totally fine. Next question. Thank you. Thanks, Michael Humberto. This Hangout is recorded somewhere for reference later. This becomes a YouTube video.
Yeah, we'll be, once we're done with this will become a YouTube video. We're also going to add some additional resources. We have a ton of resources out there, blog posts and other help articles for folks applying. We'll make this public and make it accessible so that you can click through and find the areas of interest and also find other resources.
Do you give awards to the same artist or applicant more than once? Yes.
We do. Keep in mind, though, if you are applying for multiple projects, the likelihood of getting an award twice or more than once in the same round is less. It's not. It is possible, but it is less than it is just less.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're essentially putting your projects in competition with each other.
To a degree, depends on the projects. Eventually, they'll meet up. Depending on the projects, you might have a project that is for dance and a project that's for recording. Those will be seen by separate sets of panelists, so they won't actually start meeting until we get closer to the end. But it does happen, and it has happened. It is possible, but it is usually less likely that it's going to happen. But it does happen.
Mm-hmm. So it looks like we've answered all the questions.
Great.
Yeah. You're welcome. You're welcome, Allie Cook.
Is there one more?
She just said thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. We're like I said, next week we'll send out more information about the one next week. Next week will be a little bit more specific. We're going to break down a couple of completed projects and look at where they were successful and where they were unsuccessful. Again, we'll open the floor for questions that come through and keep them coming. The best way to reach us is by emailing info@newmusicusa.org.
That goes to all three of us.
Yep, that's the best way to reach us. You certainly can call, but you're going to probably get a quicker response if you email us through info@newmusicusa.org.
Yeah, but that being said, we're happy to talk to you.
Always happy to talk.
Yep,
be aware that as we get closer to the deadline, it's going to get harder.
Got one more question for Angel.
Real quick.
Interdisciplinary versus small ensemble. Go with interdisciplinary because small. You can select both, but definitely select both both interdisciplinary and small ensemble.
Select both. Select both.
Do you?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you all, and we'll see maybe some of you next week.